In the vast darkness between stars, where ancient civilizations whisper warnings through quantum channels, there exists a name that makes even the most hardened war veterans fall silent. Not spoken in the grand halls of the Galactic Council, not recorded in any official military database, not even acknowledged by those who claim to rule the known universe. But in the shadows of 1,000 worlds, in the trembling voices of survivors, in the final transmissions of ships that simply vanish, her legend grows. They call her the Silent Death, the Void Walker, the human ghost, the galaxy's most advanced species, beings who bend reality with thought alone, who command fleets spanning light years, who have conquered death itself. They lock their doors when her name is whispered. They pray to gods they've long forgotten when they hear the stories. Because Arya Chen doesn't just hunt, she doesn't just kill, she makes the impossible possible. She turns the hunters into the hunted. She takes everything the galaxy believes about warfare, about technology, about the limits of what one being can accomplish, and she shatters it with nothing but human ingenuity and a silence so complete it makes the void itself seem noisy. The galaxy thought it knew what terror looked like. It was wrong. And now, as the greatest threat in galactic history awakens from its slumber, as ancient evils stir in the deep dark, as civilizations prepare for a war that could end everything, they're going to find out why the most dangerous predator in the universe doesn't roar. She doesn't even whisper. She just acts. Welcome to the hunt. The Carathian battlecruiser Dominance of Stars cut through the void like a blade through silk, its massive hull gleaming with the kind of technology that made lesser species weep in awe. Captain Vexstar stood on the bridge, his 6 arms folded across his chitinous chest, watching the tactical display with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. Behind him, his crew of elite warriors monitored their stations with the precision that had made the Carathian Empire the most feared military force in 3 galactic sectors. "Status report," Vexstar commanded, his voice resonating through the bridge with the harmonic frequencies that marked him as nobility among his kind. "All systems optimal, Captain," responded his second-in-command, a scarred veteran whose shell bore the marks of a dozen campaigns. Long-range sensors detect no threats within a 50 light-minute radius. The convoy remains secured in our defensive formation. Vexstar's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. Behind them, protected by the battlecruiser's massive firepower, traveled 12 heavy transport vessels carrying the most valuable cargo in the known galaxy. The stolen research data from the Terran Confederation's most classified military installations. Information about human combat techniques, psychological profiles, technological blueprints, everything the Carathian Empire needed to finally crush the stubborn species that had dared to resist their expansion. The humans were clever, Vexstar admitted to himself. More clever than any species had a right to be with such limited technology and such short lifespans. They had managed to hold out against Carathian forces for almost 3 standard years, using tactics that bordered on the impossible. Hit-and-run strikes that appeared from nowhere, ships that seemed to vanish into space itself, soldiers who fought with a desperation that even seasoned warriors found unsettling. But desperation could only carry a species so far. The Carathians had finally managed to penetrate Terran space, raid their most secure facilities, and steal the secrets that would end this annoying conflict once and for all. With this data, they could predict human tactics, counter their strategies, and bring the full might of the Empire to bear on their pathetically small worlds. "Captain," the communications officer called out, her voice carrying a note of puzzlement, "I'm receiving a priority transmission from Fleet Command." "Put it through." The holographic display shimmered to life, revealing the imposing figure of Admiral Kethfar, Supreme Commander of the 4th Fleet. His ancient shell was decorated with honors spanning 3 centuries of conquest, and his eyes held the cold wisdom of someone who had seen entire civilizations rise and fall. "Captain Vexstar," the Admiral began without preamble, "you are to alter your course immediately. Intelligence has detected unusual activity in your projected path. Vexstar's primary arms gestured dismissively. Admiral, with respect, we are operating under the highest security protocols. Our route was chosen specifically to avoid all known Terran patrol areas. There is no possibility of interception. Captain, Admiral Kethvar's voice carried a warning that made even the bridge crew tense. You do not understand. This is not about Terran patrol ships or their conventional forces. Our deep space monitors have detected something else, something that should not exist. Clarify, Admiral. The Admiral paused, and for a moment Vexstar could have sworn he saw something resembling fear in those ancient eyes. 3 hours ago, long-range sensors detected a gravitational anomaly in your sector. At first, our analysts believed it to be a natural phenomenon, but the signature is wrong, Captain. It moves with purpose. It follows patterns that suggest intelligence, and most disturbing of all, with trust, Teddy. Another pause, longer this time. It appears to be tracking your convoy. The bridge fell silent, except for the steady hum of the ship's massive engines. Vexstar felt his secondary hearts skip a beat, though he maintained his composure. Admiral, our sensors show no contacts. Whatever your monitors detected, it cannot be in our immediate vicinity. Captain Vexstar, I have been fighting across this galaxy for longer than your homeworld has been mapped. I have seen technologies that defy explanation and enemies that should be impossible. Trust me when I tell you that what cannot be detected is often the most dangerous threat of all. The Admiral leaned forward, his massive frame filling the display. There are rumors, Captain, whispers from the outer systems. Stories of ships that simply vanish without trace, of entire squadrons that disappear between one sensor sweep and the next. The survivors, those few who manage to escape, they all tell the same tale, which is silence, Captain. Perfect, absolute silence. No energy signatures, no thermal traces, no gravitational displacement. Nothing. And then, in that silence, death comes calling. Vexstar's confidence wavered for the first time in years. The Corethian Empire did not traffic in superstition or ghost stories. If Admiral Kethvar was concerned enough to contact them directly, the threat was real. What are your orders, Admiral? Change course to heading 77 Mark IV. Rendezvous with Battle Group Omega at the Thesra Nebula. We will provide escort for the remainder of your journey. Admiral, that will add 4 standard days to our transit time. Captain Vexstar, I would rather have that data arrive late than not at all. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in an uncomfortable quiet. Vexstar stared at the tactical display for a long moment, weighing his options. His orders were clear: deliver the stolen Terran research to Imperial Command at the earliest possible moment. Every hour of delay meant more time for the humans to realize what had been taken and potentially change their protocols. But Admiral Kethvar was not known for paranoia or excessive caution. If he was concerned enough to order a course change, helm, prepare to alter course as directed. Captain, his weapons officer interrupted. Incoming transmission from the convoy. Transport 7 reports a minor drive fluctuation. They're requesting permission to drop out of formation for repairs. Vexstar's mandibles clicked in annoyance. How long for repairs? Estimated 2 hours, Captain. 2 hours. Every instinct Vexstar possessed screamed that they should maintain formation and continue on their original heading, but the memory of the Admiral's warning nagged at him. Perhaps it would be better to deal with the mechanical issue now, in open space, rather than risk a breakdown in a more dangerous area. Very well. Signal the convoy to form a defensive perimeter around Transport 7. All ships to battle readiness. I want continuous sensor sweeps at maximum range. The orders were carried out with military precision. 12 massive transport vessels arranged themselves in a protective formation while the battlecruiser took position at the center, its weapon systems powered and ready. The damaged transport began its repairs, engineering teams working with the efficiency that came from years of military discipline. For the first hour, nothing happened. Sensor sweeps revealed empty space in all directions. The convoy maintained perfect formation, and the repairs proceeded on schedule. Vexstar began to relax, wondering if perhaps the Admiral's concerns were unfounded after all. Then the silence began. It started subtly. The steady background chatter of crew communications grew quieter. The normal sounds of the ship's system seemed somehow muted. Even the ever-present hum of the engines appeared to diminish, though the instruments showed no change in power levels. Vexstar noticed it first because of his species-enhanced hearing. Where before there had been the comfortable sounds of a working starship, now there was less. As if something was absorbing the very vibrations that carried sound through the hull. Standing size. Communications run a full diagnostic on all audio systems. Aye, Captain. All systems showing green. No malfunctions detected. The silence deepened. Now even the crew seemed to sense it, their movements becoming more careful, their voices dropping to whispers without conscious thought. The bridge felt like a tomb, despite being filled with sophisticated equipment and highly trained personnel. "Sensors!" Vexstar called out, his own voice sounding strangely flat. "Report! No contacts, Captain!" All approaches clear. The convoy remains in formation, but something was wrong. Vexstar could feel it in his bones, an instinctive warning that came from millions of years of evolution. His people had not become apex predators on their homeworld by ignoring such feelings. Tactical, bring all weapon systems to full combat readiness. Raise shields to maximum. Captain, his second-in-command approached quietly. Perhaps we should signal the Admiral. Request immediate assistance. Before Vexstar could respond, the communications officer suddenly straightened at her station. "Captain, I'm losing contact with the convoy. The communication channels are still open, but what? There's no sound, sir." "The signals are being transmitted, but when they arrive, there's nothing but silence." The temperature on the bridge seemed to drop several degrees. Vexstar moved to the tactical station and stared at the sensor displays. 12 green dots representing the transport vessels, all in perfect formation. The battle cruiser at the center, shields up, weapons ready, everything exactly as it should be, except for the silence. "Helm, take us closer to Transport 7. I want a visual confirmation of their status." The great ship turned slowly, its massive bulk moving with surprising grace toward the designated transport. Through the main viewport, Vexstar could see the vessel clearly. Lights glowed from its many windows. Navigation beacons flashed in their regular patterns. The ship appeared completely normal, but there was no communication, no acknowledgement of their approach, no response to repeated hails. "Captain," the sensor operator's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm reading life signs aboard Transport 7. The crew is at their stations." But what? "They're not moving, sir. At all. It's as if they're frozen in place." Vexstar felt his primary hearts hammering against his shell. Around him, the bridge crew worked at their stations with increasing desperation, trying to re-establish contact, trying to understand what was happening, but the silence continued to grow, spreading through the convoy like a plague. "Captain," the weapons officer reported, her voice tight with fear. "Transport 3 has stopped responding. And Transport 9, they're still in formation, but silent," Vexstar finished. He activated the ship-wide communication system, his voice echoing through every corridor and compartment. "All hands, this is the captain. We are dealing with an unknown threat. All personnel are to remain at their stations and maintain combat readiness. Engineering teams, I want maximum power to shields and weapons." But even as he spoke, Vexstar realized that his voice seemed to be swallowed by the growing silence. The ship's internal communication system was working perfectly, but somehow the sound itself was being muted, absorbed, consumed. One by one, the transports fell silent. Their lights continued to shine, their engines continued to burn, their crews remained at their stations, but they might as well have been ghost ships drifting through the void. And then, just as Vexstar was about to order an emergency jump to hyperspace, the sensors detected something impossible. There was a ship out there. It appeared on the displays like a whisper made manifest, so faint that the computer had to enhance the image 3 times before it became visible. Small, sleek, and utterly silent, it moved through space with the fluid grace of a predator stalking its prey. The ship was human, but that was impossible. Human vessels were crude, noisy things that announced their presence across light years with their primitive engines and excessive energy signatures. This craft was the opposite of everything Imperial intelligence knew about Terran technology. It moved without engine flare, cast no heat signature, generated no electromagnetic radiation. It was a ghost ship in every sense of the word. And it was beautiful. Even Vexstar, trained from birth to see humans as inferior beings fit only for conquest or destruction, could not deny the elegant perfection of the vessel gliding through his convoy. It was art in motion, poetry written in metal and energy, a ship designed not just for function, but for the pure aesthetic joy of perfect engineering. "All weapons, target that vessel," Vexstar commanded. "Prepare to fire." But as the targeting systems locked onto the human ship, something extraordinary happened. The vessel simply wasn't there anymore. Not destroyed, not jumped to hyperspace, not hidden behind some exotic cloaking device. It had simply ceased to exist in that location and begun existing in another, as if the fundamental laws of physics were merely suggestions to be politely ignored. The ship reappeared behind Transport 7 so close that its hull almost touched the massive cargo vessel. And then, with movements too precise and too quick for the eye to follow, it began to cut. The human vessel extended what appeared to be a cutting beam of some kind, though unlike any energy weapon in the Corethian arsenal. Where it touched Transport 7's hull, metal simply parted like water, creating perfectly smooth openings that showed no signs of heat damage or stress fractures. It was surgical in its precision. "Fire! Fire all weapons!" Vexstar screamed. The battlecruiser's massive gun batteries opened up, sending streams of coherent energy toward the human ship. Enough firepower to level a city, enough destructive force to crack a moon. The space around Transport 7 lit up like a star being born. But when the light faded, the human ship was untouched. It had moved between the energy beams with impossible grace, dancing through the deadly light show as if performing a carefully choreographed ballet, and all the while it continued its surgical work on Transport 7's hull. "Impossible," Vexstar breathed. "No ship can move like that. No pilot can react that quickly." But even as he spoke, he began to understand. This was not about superior technology or advanced engineering. This was about something far more fundamental. This was about a human being who had pushed beyond the normal limits of their species, who had become something more than the sum of their biological parts. The cutting was complete. The human ship withdrew from Transport 7 and simply hung in space, waiting. Inside the transport, Vexstar could see through the perfectly smooth opening that had been cut in its hull. The cargo bay was visible, along with the precious stolen data that represented months of planning and risk. And standing in the center of that cargo bay, surrounded by the frozen forms of the Corethian crew, was a single human figure. She was smaller than any of the Corethian warriors, appearing almost fragile in her dark environmental suit. But there was something about her posture, about the way she stood in the midst of their paralyzed enemies, that spoke of absolute confidence and complete control. She moved through the transport with fluid efficiency, examining the stolen data containers, making decisions with the kind of calm authority that came from years of impossible missions. "Who is she?" someone whispered on the bridge. Vexstar did not answer, but he knew. Deep in his genetic memory, in the part of his mind that still remembered what it felt like to be prey instead of predator, he recognized what he was seeing. This was not just any human soldier or spy. This was something far more dangerous. This was a hunter. The figure in the transport finished her examination and began moving toward the breach in the hull. As she did, the paralyzed Corethian crew members began to stir, as if whatever force had held them in stasis was beginning to fade. But by the time they could move again, she was already gone, vanishing through the opening with a grace that defied the awkward bulk of her environmental suit. The human ship received her with the same impossible precision with which it had performed the cutting operation. She simply stepped from the transport into her own vessel's airlock, and then both ships began to move. "Pursuit course," Vexstar ordered desperately. "All power to engines. We cannot let her escape with that data." But even as the battlecruiser began to turn, Vexstar knew it was hopeless. The human ship moved through space like it was swimming through water, flowing around gravitational fields and sliding between dimensions with an ease that made their massive vessel seem like a clumsy asteroid in comparison. The last thing they saw of her was a brief flash of engine light as she accelerated to impossible speeds and vanished into the starfield, taking with her not only the stolen data, but also something far more valuable and far more dangerous. She had taken their confidence. For the first time in their species' proud military history, a Carithian battle fleet had encountered an enemy they could not fight, could not catch, and could not understand. An enemy who turned their greatest advantages against them and made their most sophisticated technology seem like children's toys. As the convoy regrouped and began the long journey home with their mission in ruins, Captain Vexstar stared into the empty space where the human ship had disappeared and felt something he had never experienced before. Fear, not just of death or defeat, but of facing an enemy who fought by rules he could not comprehend, using methods he could not counter, achieving impossible things with an ease that suggested they were barely trying. Somewhere out there, moving through the galaxy with perfect silence and absolute purpose, was a human who had become something more than human. A hunter who had turned the hunters into the hunted. And, for the first time in his life, Vexstar understood why the galaxy whispered her name in the darkness. In the vast silence of space, something had heard those whispers. And it was coming. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of Terra Station, watching Earth turn slowly below her through the massive transparent aluminum viewport. The blue marble looked peaceful from this distance, its scars hidden by atmosphere and clouds. But Sarah knew better. She had seen the casualty reports, read the intelligence briefings, watched entire human colonies simply vanish from the star charts when the Carethian Empire decided they were inconvenient. 3 years of war had changed everything about human civilization. The peaceful traders and explorers who had first ventured into galactic space were gone, replaced by soldiers, spies, and survivors who had learned to fight battles they should never have been able to win. The transformation had been brutal but necessary. The galaxy had taught humanity a hard lesson. Nice species finish extinct. Admiral, her aide Captain Morrison, approached quietly, carrying a secure datapad that glowed with the red indicators of classified information. Priority transmission from Deep Space Command. Eyes only. Sarah took the pad and activated it with her biometric signature. The message was short, but its implications made her stomach clench with a mixture of pride and worry. Operation successful. Package recovered. Returning to base. Just 3 lines of text, but they represented something unprecedented in human military history. Not only had they intercepted a Carithian convoy carrying stolen Terran intelligence, but they had recovered it without losing a single human life. The enemy fleet had been left intact but helpless, their precious cargo gone, their confidence shattered. Only one person could have accomplished such a mission. "Sir?" Morrison noticed her expression. "Bad news?" "No, Captain. The opposite, though sometimes I'm not sure there's a difference anymore." Sarah handed back the datapad. "Cancel my morning appointments. I need to speak with the Defense Council immediately." "All of them, sir. All of them, and Captain." "Make sure General Harrison attends personally. He needs to hear this." An hour later, Sarah stood before the assembled leaders of Earth's military forces in the secure conference room deep within Terra Station's armored core. 12 men and women who had guided humanity through its darkest hour, each bearing the weight of billions of lives on their shoulders. At the head of the table sat General Marcus Harrison, Supreme Commander of Terran Forces, a man whose strategic genius had kept Earth free when every projection said they should have fallen years ago. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, activating the holographic display in the center of the table, "we have just achieved something that our own intelligence services classified as impossible." The display showed a tactical recreation of the Carethian convoy, 12 massive transport vessels protected by one of their most powerful battlecruisers. The ships were rendered in precise detail, every weapon system and defensive capability highlighted in red. 6 hours ago, a Carethian battle fleet carrying stolen Terran intelligence was intercepted in the Proxima sector. The convoy consisted of 12 heavy transports and the battlecruiser Dominance of Stars, flagship of Captain Vexstar, one of their most experienced commanders. General Harrison leaned forward, his weathered face skeptical. "Intercepted by whom? We have no forces in that sector capable of engaging a Carethian battle group." "That's correct, sir. We don't." Sarah touched a control, and the display zoomed in on one of the transport vessels. The mission was carried out by a single operative using a single ship. The room fell silent. Admiral Chen could see the disbelief on their faces, followed by the gradual understanding of what she was telling them. "Arya," General Harrison said quietly, it wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. Your granddaughter has just accomplished what an entire fleet couldn't do." She infiltrated a defended convoy, neutralized a battlecruiser's escort capabilities, recovered our stolen intelligence, and escaped without casualties on either side. "Without casualties?" Admiral Rodriguez, head of naval intelligence, sounded incredulous. "How is that possible? The Carethians don't surrender and they don't retreat. Because she didn't fight them, Admiral. She simply worked around them." Sarah manipulated the display, showing the precision cuts made in Transport 7's hull. She used some kind of advanced cutting technology to create surgical openings, entered the transport, retrieved the data, and departed. The entire Carethian crew was left unharmed but temporarily incapacitated. Temporarily incapacitated how? We don't know. The after-action reports from Carethian channels mention paralysis, sensory disruption, and what they describe as silence fields. Our best guess is that she's developed some form of non-lethal neural inhibitor, possibly based on the sonic technology she's been experimenting with. General Harrison stood and walked to the viewport, staring out at the stars where his granddaughter was somewhere among them. "When did we last have direct contact with her?" 14 months ago, sir, when she requested permission to operate independently." "And we gave it to her?" "You gave it to her, General." "Against the advice of this council, I might add." Harrison turned back to face the assembled officers. "Because I knew what the rest of you were too afraid to admit. We were losing this war using conventional tactics. The Carethians outgun us, outtech us, and outnumber us by factors that make victory mathematically impossible. We needed something they couldn't predict, couldn't counter, couldn't understand." "Sir," Colonel Santos from Special Operations spoke up. "With respect, we've lost contact with her entirely. She operates without oversight, without backup, without any connection to command structure. How do we know she's still fighting for us?" The question hung in the air like smoke. It was the fear that none of them wanted to voice, but all of them felt. Arya Chen had become something unprecedented in human military history, a one-person force capable of influencing galactic events. Such power, operating without restraint, could easily turn against those who had created it. "Because," Admiral Chen said quietly, "she just returned stolen intelligence instead of keeping it for herself. She could have sold that data to any number of species who would pay handsomely for insight into both human and Carethian capabilities. She could have used it to establish her own power base somewhere in the outer systems. Instead, she's bringing it home." "When will she arrive?" Harrison asked. "Unknown, sir. Her ship doesn't follow normal transit routes or schedules. She could appear in our space at any moment, or she might take weeks to return. The only thing we know for certain is that when she does arrive, she'll do so without any advance warning." As if summoned by those words, the room's communication system activated with an urgent chime. The duty officer's voice echoed through the speakers with barely controlled excitement. Admiral Chen, priority contact from Deep Space Control. Unknown vessel requesting clearance for approach to Terra Station. They're transmitting current authentication codes. Sarah and Harrison exchanged glances. "Put them through to this room," Sarah ordered. The holographic display shifted to show an incoming transmission. After a moment of static, a figure appeared before them that made several council members inhale sharply. Arya Chen looked like she had aged a decade in the months since they had last seen her. Her face was leaner, her eyes sharper, and there was something about her posture that spoke of a person who had moved beyond the normal boundaries of human experience. She wore a simple black uniform without rank insignia or unit identification, but somehow she commanded more presence than any of the decorated officers in the room. "Admiral Chen, General Harrison," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the vast distance of space. "Requesting permission to dock. I have recovered materials that require immediate analysis." "Permission granted," Harrison replied immediately. "Bay 7 is being cleared for your arrival." "Thank you, General." "I should also inform you that we may have visitors soon." "What kind of visitors?" "The kind that don't make appointments." There might have been the ghost of a smile on her lips. "I may have attracted some attention during the retrieval operation." The transmission ended, leaving the council in stunned silence. Admiral Chen was the first to recover. "All departments, priority status. I want full security teams in Bay 7, our best technical analysts standing by, and intelligence ready for immediate debriefing. Whatever she's bringing back, it's going to change things." As the council members dispersed to their various responsibilities, General Harrison remained by the viewport. Admiral Chen approached him quietly. "Marcus, are you all right?" "I keep wondering," he said without turning around, "if we created a hero or a monster. Does it matter?" "She's winning a war we couldn't fight. It matters to me. She's family, Sarah, the only family I have left." He finally turned to face her. "When her parents were killed in the Corethian raid on New Geneva, I promised I would take care of her, guide her, help her become the person she was meant to be. You did that. Did I? Or did I turn a grieving 16-year-old into a weapon?" He paused, staring out at the stars again. "Sometimes I watch the intelligence reports about her missions, and I don't recognize the person they describe. The granddaughter I knew was brilliant. Yes. Driven, absolutely. But she was also warm, funny, full of dreams about exploring the galaxy and making contact with new civilizations. The galaxy changed, Marcus. She adapted. No, Sarah, she transcended. And I'm not sure if that's evolution or tragedy. Bay 7 had been cleared of all non-essential personnel by the time Arya's ship arrived. Admiral Chen stood with a small team of technicians and security officers, watching the approach through the bay's atmospheric barrier. They expected to see some kind of advanced stealth ship, something revolutionary that would explain her capabilities. Instead, they saw poetry. The vessel that glided into Bay 7 moved like liquid starlight, its hull seeming to shift and flow as it settled onto the landing platform. It was smaller than most military shuttles, clearly designed for a single occupant, but every line spoke of technological advancement decades beyond anything in Terran databases. The ship's surface appeared to be made of some kind of programmable matter, shifting between mirror-bright metal and star-dark absorption material as they watched. When the airlock opened, Arya Chen emerged alone, carrying a single data case. She moved with the fluid efficiency that had marked her since childhood, but now that efficiency had been refined to an almost supernatural degree. Every step was exactly the right length, every gesture economically perfect, every movement calculated to achieve maximum effect with minimum effort. "Admiral Chen," she said, offering a crisp salute that was returned immediately, "the recovered intelligence is intact and uncompromised. She handed over the data case. "You'll find it contains not only our stolen research, but also significant intelligence about Promethean military capabilities and strategic planning." "How significant?" Admiral Chen accepted the case, noting that it felt heavier than it appeared. "Significant enough that they'll be changing their entire operational doctrine within the week, and significant enough that they'll be sending everything they have to make sure it doesn't happen again." Before Admiral Chen could respond, the station's alert klaxons began wailing. The bay's communication system crackled to life with the voice of the duty officer. "Admiral Chen to the command center immediately. We have multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace." Large formation, Corinthian signatures. Admiral Chen handed the data case to a nearby technician and activated her personal communicator. "Command, this is Chen. How many ships?" 17 vessels, Admiral, including at least 3 battlecruisers and what appears to be a Dreadnought-class command ship." The blood drained from Admiral Chen's face. A Corinthian dreadnought was a planet killer, a ship so massive and so heavily armed that most species would surrender rather than face one in battle. "They followed me," Arya said calmly, as if discussing the weather. "I expected they would." "You expected this?" Admiral Chen stared at her. "You led a Corinthian battle fleet directly to Earth?" "I led them to where they needed to be." Arya walked to one of the bay's tactical displays and began manipulating the controls with practiced efficiency. "Admiral, what's the current status of the Terran defense grid?" "All platforms are operational, but against a force that size, not the weapons platforms, the sensor network." "How accurate are our tracking capabilities?" "Within 0.001% at maximum range." "Why?" "Because precision is going to be very important in the next few hours." Arya finished her adjustments to the display and stepped back. "Admiral, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Admiral Chen looked at the tactical display, now showing the approaching Corinthian fleet in detail. 17 ships, any one of which could devastate an entire human world, led by a dreadnought that could crack a planet's crust with its main weapons. "What do you need?" "I need you to evacuate all non-essential personnel from Terra Station. I need all human ships to pull back beyond the asteroid belt, and I need you to give me complete access to the station's defensive systems." "Arya, Terra Station's weapons couldn't scratch the paint on that dreadnought." "I'm not planning to use the weapons, Admiral." There was something in her smile that made Admiral Chen's spine tingle. "I'm going to use the silence." For a moment, Admiral Chen didn't understand. Then she remembered the reports from the convoy intercept, the descriptions of paralyzed crews and ships that moved without sound. She looked at Arya with new eyes, beginning to comprehend the magnitude of what she was suggesting. "You're going to do to an entire fleet what you did to one transport? I'm going to do something much more interesting than that." Arya moved toward the bay's exit. "But first, I need to make some modifications to Terra Station's systems. And Admiral, you might want to contact the other human colonies. Tell them to expect some new neighbors soon." "New neighbors?" "The Corinthians are about to discover that there are worse things in the galaxy than losing a war." Arya paused at the exit, her expression becoming serious for the first time. There are some lessons that can only be taught through experience. They're about to receive a very thorough education. As Arya disappeared into the station's corridors, Admiral Chen activated the general evacuation protocols and began the complex process of preparing Earth's defenses for a battle they couldn't win through conventional means. But for the first time in months, she found herself feeling something unexpected: hope. Outside, in the black between worlds, 17 Corinthian warships continued their approach to Earth, their crews confident in their superior firepower and their mission of vengeance. They came seeking to destroy the humans who had dared to embarrass their empire. They had no idea they were flying into the web of a spider who had been preparing for their arrival since she was 16 years old. In the depths of Terra Station, Arya Chen began her work, turning humanity's most important military installation into something the galaxy had never seen before: a trap made of silence and starlight. And when it closed, the Corethians would learn why the most dangerous predator in the universe was not the one that roared the loudest, it was the one that made no sound at all. Supreme Admiral Kethvar stood in the command center of the dreadnought Eternal Dominion, watching the blue-green world grow larger on the main display. Earth looked deceptively peaceful, its surface unmarked by the orbital bombardment platforms that should have reduced it to smoking ruin years ago. The delay in conquering this particular world had been an embarrassment to the Corethian Empire, but it was an embarrassment that would end today. Admiral, his intelligence chief, approached, carrying a datapad filled with tactical information. Final analysis of the target system. Kethvar accepted the report without taking his eyes off Earth. 3 years of war had taught him to respect human unpredictability, even while despising their inferior technology. They had proven capable of surprising tactics and desperate courage. But courage meant nothing against the firepower he had brought to bear. Defenses? Minimal, Admiral. 3 orbital platforms with antiquated particle beam arrays. A small patrol fleet that is already withdrawn beyond effective range. They appear to be concentrating their forces around a single space station in high orbit. Terra Station, Kethvar, identified. Their primary military command facility. They're making their last stand there. It appears so, Admiral. Our intelligence estimates indicate they have perhaps 200 personnel aboard the station. Against our force, resistance should last no more than a few minutes. Kethvar's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. 17 ships of the line, including 3 battle cruisers and his own dreadnought, against a single, obsolete space station. It was not a battle. It was an execution. The humans would learn what happened to species that dared to steal from the Corethian Empire. Signal the fleet. Battle Formation Alpha. All ships are to target the station's critical systems. I want it disabled, not destroyed. We will board it and recover our stolen intelligence, then broadcast the surrender ceremonies across the galaxy. The orders were transmitted with military efficiency, and across the Corethian fleet, weapon systems powered up and targeting solutions locked onto Terra Station. The massive station hung in Earth's orbit like a metal moon, its defensive screens glowing faintly as they prepared for the inevitable assault. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "incoming transmission from the human station. Put it through." The holographic display shimmered, revealing an elderly human male in a military uniform. Kethvar recognized him from intelligence files. General Marcus Harrison, one of the primary architects of human resistance. The man's face was lined with age and weariness, but his eyes held the steady resolve that had made the humans such irritatingly persistent opponents. "Admiral Kethvar," Harrison began, his voice carrying clearly across the void between fleets. "I am General Marcus Harrison, commanding Terra Station. I assume you've come for your stolen intelligence." "General Harrison, your assumption is correct. You will surrender the data taken from our convoy, along with any copies or analysis derived from it. You will also surrender your station and submit to Imperial justice." "I'm afraid I can't do that, Admiral." Kethvar's secondary arms gestured dismissively. "General, you are facing 17 Imperial warships, including a Dreadnought-class command vessel. Your station's defenses are inadequate to resist even one of my escorts. Surrender now, and I will ensure your personnel are treated according to Imperial military code." "Admiral, I appreciate the offer, but you're making an incorrect assumption, which is, you assume we intend to resist." Harrison's expression remained neutral. "We don't." The words hung in space between the two fleets, carrying implications that Kethvar found disturbing. In 3 years of war, the humans had never surrendered easily. They fought with desperate ferocity right up until the moment their ships exploded or their positions were overrun. This calm acceptance of defeat was completely contrary to their established patterns. "Clarify your statement, General." "We're not going to fight you, Admiral, but we're not going to surrender either. Instead, we're going to show you something interesting." Before Kethvar could respond, the transmission ended. Around him, the bridge crew exchanged uncertain glances. The Admiral himself felt a growing unease that he couldn't quite identify. Something about this entire situation felt wrong. "Admiral," the sensor operator reported, "the human station is powering down its defensive systems." "All of them?" "Yes, sir. Weapons offline. Shields dropping. They appear to be preparing for surrender." "Or for something else," Kethvar muttered. "Sensors. Full-spectrum analysis. I want to know everything about what's happening on that station." For several minutes, the Korethian fleet held position while their sophisticated scanning equipment examined Terra's station in minute detail. The readings were puzzling. The station's power grid was active, but energy was being channeled in patterns that made no sense, according to any known technology. "Admiral," the science officer looked up from her instruments with confusion evident in her posture. "I'm detecting unusual gravitational fluctuations around the human station. The readings don't match any known phenomena." "Artificial gravity generators?" "No, sir. This is something else. The gravitational field appears to be folded somehow, as if space itself is being manipulated at the quantum level." Before Kethvar could process this information fully, something impossible happened. The sound stopped. It began with the bridge's environmental systems. The steady hum of air circulation faded to nothing. Then the vibrations from the ship's massive engines became muted, then silent. Within moments, the Eternal Dominion's bridge had become as quiet as a tomb. "Engineering!" Kethvar called out, but his voice sounded flat and distant. "Report on engine status." "All systems operating normally, Admiral," came the reply, though the words seemed to arrive through layers of insulation. "Power output is at 100% efficiency." But something was wrong. Kethvar could feel it in his bones. A wrongness that went beyond mere mechanical failure. The silence was spreading through his ship like a living thing, absorbing sound, dampening vibration, creating an atmosphere of unnatural quiet that made his crew speak in whispers. "Communications? Contact the fleet. I want status reports from all ships." The communications officer worked at her station for several long moments before looking up with evident confusion. "Admiral, all channels are open, but the signals are being dampened somehow. I'm receiving transmissions from the fleet, but they're barely audible. Across the 17 ships of the Korethian fleet, the same phenomenon was occurring. Advanced military vessels that had conquered dozens of worlds suddenly found themselves wrapped in a blanket of impossible silence. Their instruments showed normal operations, but the crews could barely hear each other speak. "Admiral," the science officer's voice was barely a whisper now, "I'm detecting massive energy expenditures from the human station. Whatever they're doing, it's requiring enormous amounts of power." Kethvar moved to the tactical display, watching as the sensor readouts showed Terra Station at the center of an expanding sphere of gravitational distortion. The human facility appeared to be generating some kind of field effect that was propagating through local space at the speed of light. "All ships prepare to withdraw to safe distance." But even as he gave the order, Kethvar realized it was too late. The field effect had already encompassed the entire Korethian fleet, and with its expansion, the silence deepened. Now even the vibrations transmitted through the ship's hull were being suppressed, creating an environment of such perfect quiet that crew members could hear their own heartbeats echoing in their skulls. And then she spoke. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, carried not through the ship's communication system but somehow transmitted directly into the minds of every person aboard every vessel. It was a human voice, female, young, but carrying an authority that made even seasoned military veterans straighten to attention. "Admiral Kethvar," the voice said, perfectly audible despite the supernatural silence that surrounded them. "My name is Arya Chen. I am the person who retrieved your stolen intelligence from Transport 7. Kethvar tried to respond but found that his voice would not carry beyond his immediate vicinity. Whatever technology the humans were using, it allowed her to communicate while preventing any reply. "I assume you've come to recover your data and teach us a lesson about defying the Korethian Empire. I understand the impulse. Your species has built its entire civilization on the principle of technological and military superiority. The idea that a lesser species could outwit your forces challenges the fundamental assumptions of your culture. Around Kethvar, his crew listened in fascination and growing fear as the voice continued, speaking with the calm precision of a professor delivering a lecture. But you've made a critical error in your analysis. You assume that humans achieved victory through superior technology or overwhelming force. In fact, we achieved victory through a much simpler principle. We learned to think like our enemy while ensuring our enemy could never think like us. The tactical displays suddenly changed, showing not the expected view of Terra Station, but a detailed schematic of Kethvar's own ship. Every system, every weakness, every crew position was highlighted with impossible accuracy. The Dreadnought Eternal Dominion. Commissioned 7 years ago, veteran of 16 campaigns, flagship of Supreme Admiral Kethvar. Length, 3 kilometers. Crew complement, 8,400. Primary armament, 12 heavy particle cannons capable of cracking a moon. Secondary systems include point defense arrays, boarding craft, and enough firepower to sterilize a continent. The schematic rotated, showing internal details that should have been classified beyond any human access. Weaknesses: critical fusion containment systems located on Deck 47, Section 12. Environmental controls centralized in the command section with insufficient redundancy. Gravitational stabilization dependent on quantum field generators that can be disrupted by precisely calibrated interference patterns. Kethvar felt his blood turn to ice water. The level of detail being displayed was impossible. No human intelligence operation could have penetrated Imperial security deeply enough to obtain such information. You're wondering how we acquired this knowledge, the voice continued, as if reading his thoughts. The answer is simple. We asked nicely. The display changed again, showing surveillance footage from inside the transport ship she had infiltrated. Kethvar watched in growing amazement as the human figure moved through his crew with impossible grace, not harming anyone, but somehow gaining access to their computer systems, their memories, their very thoughts. Every Corethian you've ever sent against us has taught us something new about your technology, your tactics, your psychology. Every battle, every encounter, every captured intelligence report has added to our understanding. You thought you were fighting a war against an inferior species. In reality, you were participating in the galaxy's most comprehensive educational program. The silence around the fleet deepened even further, if such a thing were possible. Now even the electromagnetic hum of the ship's computers was being suppressed, creating an environment of such perfect quiet that reality itself seemed to be holding its breath. And now class is in session. Kethvar watched in horror as his ship's systems began shutting down. Not damaged, not destroyed, but simply turned off by commands that appeared to be coming from within his own computer network. Environmental controls shifted to minimal settings. Weapons powered down. Even the artificial gravity began to fluctuate in ways that left the crew floating helplessly. Across the fleet, the same phenomenon was occurring. 17 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy were being systematically disabled by an enemy they couldn't fight, couldn't reach, and couldn't understand. You came here expecting to find a desperate defense by a dying species, Arya Chen's voice continued. Instead, you found a classroom, and the lesson we're teaching is very simple. The galaxy is changing, Admiral. The old rules of conquest and domination are becoming obsolete. Through the viewports, Kethvar could see his other ships drifting helplessly, their crews visible through transparent sections as they struggled with systems that no longer responded to their commands. The pride of the Corethian military had been reduced to floating debris in a matter of minutes. Your ships will not be harmed, and your crews will not be injured, but they will not be leaving this system under their own power. We have arranged for alternative transportation. As she spoke, new contacts began appearing on the sensor displays. Ships unlike anything in Imperial databases, sleek vessels that move through space with the same impossible grace that Arya Chen had demonstrated in her personal craft. They approached the disabled Corethian fleet without haste, clearly confident in their superiority. "Who are they?" Kethvar whispered to himself. "Friends," the voice answered, somehow hearing his quiet question across the void. "Species that have learned the same lessons we've been teaching. Civilizations that have discovered there are alternatives to conquest and domination. They're here to offer your crews safe passage home, along with a message for your empire." The approaching ships were beautiful, Kethvar realized with a shock. Not just functional or impressive, but genuinely artistic in their design. They moved like dancers through space, their hulls seeming to flow and shift as they approached the helpless Corethian vessels. The message is this: the galaxy has grown tired of empires that expand through force and fear. We have found a better way. A way based on cooperation, understanding, and the sharing of knowledge rather than its theft. Kethvar tried once more to speak, to argue, to assert the authority he had built over decades of military service. But the words died in his throat as he realized the fundamental truth of what was happening. His fleet had not been defeated by superior weapons or overwhelming numbers. They had been neutralized by an intelligence so advanced, so thoroughly prepared, that resistance was not just futile but pointless. Your crews will be returned to Imperial space unharmed. They will carry with them detailed records of this encounter, along with technical specifications for the technologies you've witnessed today. Your empire will be free to analyze them, reverse engineer them, and attempt to duplicate them. A pause, during which Kethvar could almost hear the smile in her voice. You won't succeed, of course. What you've seen today represents not just advanced technology, but an entirely different approach to existence itself. It cannot be copied because it cannot be understood by those who think as you think. The rescue ships reached the disabled fleet and began the delicate process of evacuating crews from vessels that had become little more than expensive coffins floating in space. Kethvar watched his carefully trained personnel being transferred to alien vessels by beings who moved with the same fluid grace he had seen in Arya Chen. Admiral Kethvar. The voice spoke directly to him now, and he somehow knew that she could see him standing on his bridge. You have spent your life believing that strength comes from the ability to destroy, that victory requires the subjugation of others, that the universe respects only power. Through the silence that surrounded him, Kethvar felt something he had never experienced before, the presence of a mind so far beyond his own that attempting to comprehend it was like trying to see the entire galaxy from the surface of a single world. Today you've learned that strength can come from the ability to create, that victory can be achieved through understanding rather than destruction, and that the universe reserves its greatest respect for those who lift others up rather than tear them down. The evacuation was proceeding smoothly, Kethvar's crew being removed from their disabled ships with an efficiency that spoke of careful planning and enormous experience. Not a single Corethian had been harmed, though their dignity and their assumptions about galactic hierarchy had been thoroughly destroyed. Your empire stands at a crossroads, Admiral. You can continue along your current path, expanding through conquest and maintaining order through fear, until you encounter something stronger than yourselves and face the same fate as countless empires before you. The last of his crew were being evacuated now, leaving Kethvar alone on the bridge of his mighty dreadnought, surrounded by systems that no longer obeyed his commands. Or you can choose to evolve, to grow, to become something greater than the sum of your military might. The choice is yours, but it will not be offered again. A gentle vibration through the ship's hull told him that his own evacuation was beginning. Through the viewport, he could see one of the elegant rescue vessels approaching, its airlock already extending toward his ship. Go home, Admiral. Share what you have learned. Help your people understand that the galaxy is changing, and those who refuse to change with it will be left behind. As Kethvar was guided to the rescue ship by beings whose courtesy was matched only by their obvious superiority, he found himself thinking not about military tactics or strategic retreats, but about something far more fundamental. For the first time in his long career, he had encountered an enemy who had defeated him without hatred, who had demonstrated superiority without cruelty, who had achieved total victory while showing perfect mercy. It was, he realized, a lesson in what his own species could become if they chose to learn from this encounter rather than simply resent it. Behind him, 17 disabled Corethian warships drifted in Earth's orbit like monuments to the obsolescence of old thinking. They would remain there for exactly as long as it took for their crews to reach Imperial space and deliver their message. After that, Arya Chen had other plans for them. Plans that would demonstrate to the galaxy that sometimes the greatest victory was not the destruction of one's enemies, but their transformation into something better than they had ever dreamed of becoming. The lesson was ending, but the real education was just beginning. 6 months after the encounter at Earth, the Imperial Corethian Council convened an emergency session within the vast crystal halls of their homeworld's capital. The chamber could hold 10,000 beings, but today it contained only the 50 most powerful individuals in the Empire, their voices echoing in the artificial twilight as they debated the future of their civilization. Supreme Counselor Thrakvin stood at the center of the assembly, his ancient shell bearing the scars of 100 campaigns, and his eyes holding the weight of imperial authority built over millennia. But today, that authority felt fragile, undermined by reports that challenged everything the Corethian Empire believed about itself and its place in the galaxy. "We have heard Admiral Kethvar's account," Thrakvin announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the Great Hall. "We have examined the technical data recovered from the disabled fleet. We have studied the recordings and analyzed every piece of evidence brought back from the human system." He paused, allowing the assembled counselors to shift restlessly in their seats. The implications of what they had learned were staggering, requiring them to reconsider fundamental assumptions about warfare, technology, and the nature of power itself. "The question before us is simple. How do we respond to this unprecedented challenge to imperial authority?" War Minister Vexthan, a massive figure whose shell was decorated with the trophies of conquered worlds, rose from his position near the front of the assembly. "The answer is obvious, Supreme Counselor. We mobilize the entire Imperial fleet, every battle group, every dreadnought, every weapon system, in our arsenal. We glass the human worlds and end this threat before it can spread." A rumble of agreement passed through portions of the assembly, but Thrakven noticed that it was not unanimous. The old certainties that had guided the Empire for generations were beginning to crack. "And if that fails, War Minister? If they neutralize our entire fleet as easily as they disabled Admiral Kethvar's force?" "Impossible," Vexthan declared, though his voice carried less conviction than his words. "What we witnessed was some kind of technological trick, perhaps a one-time capability that required enormous resources to deploy. No species can maintain such power on a galactic scale. Can they not?" Science Advisor Quelnav stood, her slight frame making her seem almost fragile among the massive warriors that dominated the council. But her mind was among the sharpest in the Empire, and her words carried weight beyond her physical presence. "I have spent 6 months analyzing the technical data from the encounter. The humans have achieved something we believe to be impossible. They have weaponized silence itself." She gestured, and holographic displays materialized throughout the hall, showing complex equations and energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. What they demonstrated was not merely advanced technology, but a fundamental manipulation of space-time at the quantum level. It created fields of organized nothingness that absorbed energy, sound, electromagnetic radiation, even gravitational effects. Within those fields, they could move undetected, disable any technology, and neutralize any defense. "Impossible," Vexthan repeated, but with less certainty. "Moreover," Quelnav continued, "the energy requirements for such manipulation should have been astronomical. Yet, our sensors detected no massive power signatures, no unusual energy sources. They achieved these effects with an efficiency that suggests their understanding of fundamental physics far exceeds our own." The hall fell silent as the implications sank in. The Corethian Empire had built its dominance on technological superiority, but they had just encountered a species that made their most advanced systems look like primitive tools. "There is something else." Admiral Kethvar spoke for the first time since delivering his initial report. something that cannot be measured by our instruments or analyzed by our scientists. Speak, Thrakvan commanded. The human who orchestrated our defeat, this Arya Chen, she did not act like a military commander or even a sophisticated intelligence operative. She acted like a teacher. Everything about the encounter was designed to educate us rather than destroy us. Your point, Admiral? My point, Supreme Counselor, is that we may be facing something unprecedented in galactic history. Not just another species competing for resources or territory, but a civilization that has evolved beyond the need for traditional forms of power and conquest. Finance Minister Korthal, whose calculations kept the Empire's vast military machine supplied and equipped, stood slowly. If that is true, then we face a crisis that goes far beyond military defeat. Our entire economy is built on expansion and exploitation. If the humans represent a viable alternative to imperial conquest, other species will take notice. What are you saying? Thrakvan asked, though he suspected he already knew. I'm saying that in the 6 months since the Earth encounter, 17 of our client species have quietly ceased their tribute payments. 20 and 3 border systems have requested renegotiation of their defense agreements, and our intelligence services report increasing communication between human representatives and civilizations throughout the Outer Rim. The implications struck the Assembly like a physical blow. The Carithian Empire controlled thousands of worlds and dozens of species through a carefully maintained balance of military intimidation and economic dependence. If that balance was shifting, they're building an alliance, Admiral Kethvar said quietly. Not through conquest or coercion, but through cooperation. They're offering other species something we never could, partnership instead of subjugation. Preposterous! War Minister Vexton declared, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. No galactic power can be maintained through cooperation alone. Order requires strength, and strength requires the willingness to use force when necessary. Does it? Science advisor Kelnav manipulated her holographic displays, showing star charts that traced communication patterns throughout the local galactic region. Look at what they've achieved in 6 months. The humans have established diplomatic contact with 47 independent systems, 19 former imperial client states, and at least 6 major civilizations that we've been unable to conquer. The display showed a web of connections spreading outward from human space, reaching across light years to touch worlds that had previously been isolated or hostile to each other. They're creating something new, she continued. Not an empire based on fear, but a confederation based on mutual benefit. And they're doing it without firing a single shot. Till now. A new voice interrupted from the rear of the assembly. The speaker was Intelligence Director Morthal, whose network of spies and informants reached into every corner of known space. I have just received reports from our deep cover operatives in several systems. The humans are no longer content with passive diplomacy. Thrakvan felt his stomach tighten. Explain. 3 days ago, the Zephyrian Mining Collective announced they were terminating their exclusive contracts with Imperial extraction companies. Instead, they're entering into partnerships with human-sponsored cooperatives that promise better working conditions and more equitable profit sharing. Mining contracts can be renegotiated, Vexthan said dismissively. Yesterday, the Altarian Defense League formally requested human assistance in establishing orbital defense platforms around their homeworld, platforms that use the same silence technology we encountered at Earth. Now the entire assembly was listening intently. The Altarian system controlled one of the most important trade routes in the sector. And this morning, Morthul continued, his voice growing darker, we lost contact with our occupation force on Vega Prime. 18,000 troops, including 3 armored divisions and a full orbital bombardment squadron. They simply stopped responding. Attacked? Thrakvan asked. Unknown? Our last communication indicated normal operations, routine patrols, no sign of hostile activity. Then, silence. The word hung in the air like a curse. Silence. The human signature, their calling card, their way of announcing that the old rules no longer applied. Reconnaissance vessels are en route, Worthel reported. But given what we've learned about human capabilities, I doubt they'll find anything useful. Supreme Counselor Thrakven stood in the center of the Great Hall, feeling the weight of 4 centuries of imperial expansion pressing down on him. Around him, the most powerful beings in known space waited for his decision. But for the first time in his long career, he wasn't sure what that decision should be. Options, he commanded. War Minister Vexthan was the first to respond. Total war! Mobilize every fleet, every weapon system, every resource at our disposal. Assault human space with overwhelming force before they can spread their influence any further. And if we fail? Thrakven asked. Then we die as warriors, maintaining the honor of our ancestors. Science advisor Kelnav shook her head. Honorable death solves nothing. If we truly face a civilization that has evolved beyond our understanding, military action will only accelerate our downfall. What do you propose? Negotiation. Contact the humans directly. Learn what they want, what they're offering to other species. Perhaps we can find common ground. The Carithian Empire does not negotiate with inferiors, Vexthan declared. And perhaps, Admiral Kethver said quietly, that attitude is exactly what led us to this crisis. The chamber fell silent as the Admiral's words sank in. For the first time in Imperial history, a senior military officer was suggesting that their fundamental approach to galactic relations might be flawed. Admiral, Thrakven said carefully, are you suggesting that we consider altering our basic Imperial policies? I'm suggesting that we may not have a choice. The galaxy is changing around us, and if we don't change with it, we'll become extinct. Finance Minister Quarthal rose again, his expression grave. There is another factor to consider. Our economic projections show that if current trends continue, we'll lose access to critical resources within 2 standard years. The humans aren't just building political alliances, they're creating economic alternatives to imperial exploitation. He gestured, and new displays showed trade flows, resource distributions, and economic projections that painted a bleak picture of imperial finances. They're offering better deals, he continued, more equitable partnerships, higher profits for productive worlds, better working conditions for industrial populations, technological advancement for developing civilizations. From a purely economic standpoint, their model is superior to ours. Superior? Vexthan's voice rose in outrage. Are you suggesting that centuries of imperial expansion have been wrong? I'm suggesting that they may no longer be sustainable. The debate continued for hours with the assembled counselors arguing over options that ranged from immediate military action, but through it all, Thrakven found himself thinking about something Admiral Kethvar had mentioned in his private briefings. The human who had defeated them, this Arya Chen, could have destroyed the Imperial fleet. With the technology at her disposal, she could have eliminated every ship and every crew member without risk to herself. Instead, she had chosen to educate them. What kind of mind made such choices? What kind of civilization produced individuals capable of such restraint, combined with such power? There is one more option, Thrakven said finally, his voice cutting through the arguments that had filled the hall. One that none of you have mentioned. The assembly fell quiet, waiting for their leader's words. We could try to become worthy of the mercy they showed us. The suggestion struck the counselors like a physical blow. Some recoiled in horror at the implications, while others leaned forward with interest. Explained Science Advisor Kelnav requested. The humans defeated our fleet without killing a single crew member. They could have humiliated us publicly, broadcast our defeat across the galaxy, turned our capture into a propaganda victory. Instead, they sent us home with information and gave us time to consider our response. Thrakven began walking slowly around the central platform, his words carrying to every corner of the Great Hall. Perhaps their goal is not our destruction, but our transformation. Perhaps they're offering us the same choice they've offered to other species: evolve or become irrelevant. And you would have us abandon everything that made the Empire great? Vexthon demanded. I would have us consider whether what made us great is still serving us well. Thrakovan stopped walking and faced the assembly directly. We built our empire on the principle that might makes right, that superior force justifies any action, that other species exist to serve our needs. He paused, letting his words sink in. But what if we were wrong? What if there's a better way? A way that doesn't require us to live in constant fear of rebellion, that doesn't demand endless expansion to maintain economic stability, that doesn't force us to view every other species as either a resource to be exploited or a threat to be eliminated. The hall erupted into chaos as counselors began arguing among themselves. Some called for Thrakvan's immediate removal, while others demanded details of what such a transformation might involve. But through the noise and confusion, Intelligence Director Morthal stood and spoke words that cut through the debate like a blade. Supreme Counselor, the decision may be out of our hands. Explain. Long-range communications are reporting similar encounters throughout Imperial space. Human representatives are appearing in systems we've controlled for generations, offering alternatives to Imperial rule. Not threatening, not demanding, just offering. He manipulated his own displays, showing star charts that revealed the scope of human expansion. They're not conquering our territory, they're convincing it to leave us. System by system, world by world, our empire is simply choosing to become something else. Thrakvan stared at the displays, watching centuries of imperial expansion being quietly dismantled by beings who made war look like art and peace look like science. How long, he asked? At current rates, complete dissolution of imperial authority within 18 standard months. The Supreme Counselor closed his eyes and made the hardest decision of his long career. Admiral Kethvar, you will return to human space, not as a conqueror, but as an ambassador. You will request a meeting with their leaders and learn what terms they would offer for imperial membership in their confederation. The chamber fell silent, except for the sound of Vexthan's shell cracking as his muscles tensed in fury. And if they refuse? The War Minister asked through gritted mandibles. Thrakveen opened his eyes and met the gaze of every counselor in the Great Hall. Then we'll learn whether there's still honor in admitting when you've been outclassed by a superior opponent. In the depths of space, moving between stars with the silence that had become her signature, Arya Chen received the transmission from Admiral Kethvar and smiled. The lesson was working better than she had hoped. The galaxy was learning, and the real transformation was just beginning. The Concordia Station hung in the void between galaxies, a structure so vast and beautiful that it defied every assumption about what artificial constructions could achieve. Built from materials that seemed to shift between solid matter and crystallized light, the station served as the diplomatic heart of what had become known throughout the galaxy as the Silent Alliance. Admiral Kethvar stood before the observation deck's immense viewport, watching ships from dozens of species dock at the station's elegant spires. Corithian vessels moved alongside human freighters, Altairian defense ships escorted former Imperial transports, and craft from civilizations he didn't even recognize flew in formations that spoke of cooperation rather than conquest. 6 months had passed since he had returned to human space as an ambassador instead of an enemy. 6 months of the most challenging and enlightening experiences of his long career. The transformation of the galaxy was accelerating beyond anyone's projections, and at the center of it all was the quiet presence of the woman who had started this revolution with nothing more than perfect silence and impossible mercy. Admiral, a familiar voice spoke behind him, and Kethvar turned to see Arya Chen approaching across the station's main diplomatic floor. She moved with the same fluid grace he remembered from their first encounter, but now he could see qualities he had missed before. The weight of enormous responsibility, the fatigue that came from solving problems across light years, the gentle sadness of someone who had seen too much war and chosen to end it through methods that required her to bear the burden alone. "Miss Chen," he replied, offering the slight bow that had become customary among Alliance diplomats. Not the submission demanded by imperial protocol, but the mutual respect of equals working toward common goals. How are the integration talks progressing? Kethvar gestured toward the main conference area, where representatives from the former Carithian Empire were negotiating the details of their civilization's transformation from conquering force to cooperative member of the Alliance. Better than I expect. Hidden in silence, she's the galaxy's most terrifying hunter. Sci-Fi, HFY Stories.